I need to get some new nibs, but I don't know what I should get. I'm still working on getting clean lines like you taught us, and eventually I want to do your shading course. How do I know what nibs I should get? Great question. So it depends on what it is that you are going for. So let me get over to my workshop table so that you guys can see that. Okay, so I've got some nibs here. So when you are looking to do crafts, line art, lettering, fine details, you're going to want something with sharp edges, sharp points, or rounded points. So here are some examples. If you're looking to like do some of the rounder lines and things, you probably want something with more of a rounder point, because that will actually be more forgiving than something with a sharper point. And so these here are the ballpoint nibs that I have. And you should also know that how sharp or round it is will determine how thick your line is. Let me get something behind there so that focuses. So this one is really tiny, and this one is a little bit larger. And so you're going to have smaller lines with this, which will be a little bit harder to control. So I would recommend this for when you have honed your techniques. I would recommend something smaller. And then this one, where you have the larger ballpoint, is going to give you a thicker line. That's going to be a little bit easier to clean up if you have a blob or anything like that. Also, if you're doing some of the longer lines, you might try one of these guys. Let me put this down. You might try something more like a skew. Let's clear that up again. So the skew is a kind of a knife point, and it's really, really sharp. And this is great for those long lines. So if you're doing grasses, or if you're doing buildings or things like that, these long, sharp edges are really nice to work with. Even this little point you can make work. Like if you were doing fur, before you add the shading, or even if you're doing line art fur, this would be a good one to just do some little spiky fur pieces with. This one is the writing nib, and this one has a little bit of a long end to it, and at the same time it's also rounded. And so this would also work for some of those rounder edges, but it also works well for the longer lines, because it has a tendency to have more of an, like if you tapped it straight down, it has more of an oval shape, and so it gives you a little bit of that line look. Whereas if you were to turn it sideways, then you could get more of a rounded look. So there are lots of ways to play with this, but how flat or how rounded those edges are will determine how exact your lines are. And when you have a rounded skew, like this one right here is not rounded. This one has a sharp point here and a sharp point there. Those two sharp points are going to give you a very distinct beginning, and if you just tap it down, it will also give you a distinct ending. But if you have one of the rounded skews, then it would be more of a tapered ending. And so that might be something better for furs and things like that, and for things like grasses or whatever. So these are the kinds of nibs I would recommend for some of those finer details. I always get asked, so I'm going to point this out. This is a needle point, and it is just as it says. It is sharp, sharp, sharp needle point. I will use this for teeny tiny signatures or for teeny tiny detail. But if you're not careful, it does dig into the wood. If your wood is not super smooth, it's going to fight you with the grain. It's just a lot harder to control, but it is a lot of fun when you can keep a really light hand to get those fine itty bitty details in. When you are looking to buy something for shading, you generally want a flat surface. Now, you can also get wire nibs that are just the plain wire. I don't have any with me right now, but if it's just the plain wire and you can pull it, oh, hold on, I'm not showing you very well. And you can just pull those nibs, that will give you some nice shading, some general shading. But the flatter, generally the better. And so these, you can see they have a generally flat surface. And how big or how small these are will determine how small or large of an area that you can fill. So I have another one here. These two can get into really teeny tiny spaces because they have such a sharp edge to them, such a small area. And so this one is a small spade, and this one is a quill point. And so those will get into itty bitty little areas that you want to shade. And this one is a spear point, and this one is a bent shader. And I also have a rounded shader, and that one is really good. Also, these are better for getting those larger areas, and this is better for like a medium area, really. So it just depends on how big of an area you want to shade and kind of what you want to get. Some people complain about the middle parts here catching on their wood. So that's something to keep in mind. I don't generally have trouble with that unless my heat is really high and I'm working with wood that has a lot of grain. And so those are things to keep in mind. If it is giving you trouble, lighten up your grip, make sure that your hand is not pressing, you're not pressing on your wood, and then get a smooth wood grain and maybe turn your heat down if you're having trouble with those kinds of things. So the next big question I get about nibs is, should I get it bent or should I get it straight and flat? So the differences there is depending on the kind of surface that you are using. If you have something flat like this, then using a flat nib is actually going to be kind of hard because you have to get this flatter in order to get that to cooperate with shading. You can get some nice fine lines, but it's going to be harder to get it flat. However, if you have a bowl and you're trying to get into some of these harder areas, you can then reach this a little bit better with a flat tip. You can get into those side edges with a flatter tip. Whereas if you have a bent nib, then getting up against that edge, you're going to have to twist your wrist just a little bit, right, to get into those bowl-shaped areas. But if it's flat, I generally find that a 45-degree angle is wonderful. And so I will often buy mine this way because I don't do a whole lot of bowls. But I do a lot of flat surfaces. And so I always buy mine bent, and then I don't have to bend it myself and risk breaking it. I actually broke this one. Can't really, let me pull this up here so you can see it better. But this is broken right here because I tried to bend it while it was cold and it hurt my feelings. So don't bend it while it's cold. Bending it while it's hot is a little bit risky because this is an electrical unit. And so when you are putting this on and it's hot, you're holding on to electricity basically. And if you decide to just turn it off real fast and bend it, you're also risking that it cools really fast. And so you might be breaking it like I did. So I prefer not to bend it myself. I prefer to buy it bent. Another thing you can get is, let me show you the difference here. This one is a little bit more bent than, say, that one. Turn that a little more sideways. See how this one has a steeper bend? You can get a 90-degree bent, and that one is actually really nice if you're working on an angled surface. So when I am working on something, typically for a long period of time, I will use my art table where it adjusts and it angles up. And so I will angle it up and then put my piece on that. And when I'm doing that, I can't get the flat thing to do anything on that. But my 45-degree angle does pretty well, but I have to pull my hand way down. Whereas like to get it when it's angled, let's see if I can, there we go. Okay. When I've got that angle, I have to keep my hand down here. And so if my table ends right here, it's a little bit hard running into that space with my 45-degree angle. But if I have a steeper angled nib, it becomes a lot easier to get into those lower areas. And so I like those angled nibs so that I can work for long periods of time at an angle and not give myself carpal tunnel. So the next question I get is polished versus not polished. Let me see if I can find a good example right here. Okay, well, it's not a great example, but this one did not come polished. Let's see if that will clear up at all. There are teeny tiny little stripes on there because this did not come polished. And so that makes a lot of drag on my wood. When I'm pulling, it tends to not want to pull very easily, and that can make my shading and my work a little bit choppier. And you can polish these, you know, you can use a fine grit sandpaper like a, you know, 3000 or a 6000 grit, and then you can polish it yourself and then use like a honing cloth or other things to help get a fine polish. But I just prefer to buy it polished. Can you see how shiny that one is? There is no drag on this baby because I bought it polished. And so I prefer to have the professionals just do it. They do it all the time, and it makes it so that it's super buttery smooth, and I can get it to do a little bit more of what I want. Let's see, the next question is, do you get a heavy duty wire or a thin wire? Because I went and gathered my questions about nibs, because if you're nib shopping, I want you to know what you're looking for. So the heavy wires, let me actually grab these. These will be a better example. These might be a little bit hard to see still, but this is a very thin wire, and this one is a thicker wire. This one's heavier duty, and this one is standard. And the difference between these is you're able to, this one will heat up faster, and you can get a lot of details and all that kind of stuff. But when you heat things up, especially at a high heat like I like to work at, that will eventually make these wires more brittle. And the heavy duty wires hold up to that a lot better. And I actually, this shader that I said was more bent, but it's not 90 degree yet. The reason it's so bent is because I was working at such a high heat, and while I was working, it slowly bent more and more and more. So this used to be 45 degrees and it's not anymore. So that's something to keep in mind. Right now, you should all be burning light, low, and slow. But when you get more experience and all of that, and if you want to be burning for longer periods of time, I do recommend getting the heavy duty wires. You can also, like the razor tip will have a heavy duty pen. They don't necessarily have these replaceable tips. They have the pen, and that will have a thicker pen. And the reason for that is to help protect you from the heat. Those razor tip pens can get very hot, and so the thinner pens are going to release that into your fingers more than a heavy duty pen will. And my last thing I wanted to touch on when nib shopping is whether you get a replaceable tip nib or a fixed tip nib. So the fixed tip means it doesn't come off at all, right? And the replaceable tip is the kind that you mostly see me use. That's the kind where you can pull it out and just replace the nib and reuse those pens. So there are a couple of different things about that. One is the heat. Since I do work for longer periods of time, these get a little bit hot. Wherever there is a connection, that is where the heat is going to show up on your pen. So here, this has one connection, this fixed tip pen. It only has the connection right there with the wire that goes to my burner. And so this will tend to get warm a little bit faster than the black part, or especially the cork. But here with my replaceable nibs, you have a connection here and here. And so this will also get hot, and this will also get hot. So if you have your fingers right up here, having a replaceable nib can be a little bit less friendly to your fingers. So when you have those fixed tips, this is not going to get as hot up against your fingers. It's not going to really sit right there on your fingertips. And so this is why you do see me working with gloves and working with finger guards. I was looking for my finger guards here. I can show you guys that another time, but I do I work a lot with these because they're a little bit cheaper. Another thing though to keep in mind is that I did have a season where I was burning for hours on really high heat. And when I did that, you guys can see it's cooked pretty hard on the cork right there. And also the plastic blistered and broke right here. And so after a long time, and I'm talking hours of burning at a very high heat, it cracked right there and started to bubble up. And now I can get a nib in there, but when it's in there and I turn it on, it buzzes. And that's not a good sign. That means my connection isn't very good. My heat doesn't get to the end of the nibs very well. The nibs won't be burning your wood. They'll be burning your fingers. And so that is another point to consider, is that this will be a hot spot. And if you're doing it for long periods of time, it can damage your tools. And they do always say, like the manufacturers and things say, burn hot heats and then turn it off and take a break. It's better for the machine, it's better for your tool, it's better for all of those kinds of things. So I would recommend that. Something I didn't point out in the Q&A is that a Coalwood pen is also interchangeable with an Optima pen and a Burnmaster pen. So if you have any of those burners, they will work interchangeably with any of their pens. Okay, and if you get a pretty little adapter like this one, then you can make a razor tip fit your Optima, fit your Coalwood, and fit your Burnmaster. And vice versa. You can get a lovely little adapter for your razor tip and make that fit any of your Coalwood pens, your Optima pens, or your Burnmaster pens. So it's really important to just focus on what burner you want to get, and then you can get whatever nibs you would like from any of those companies because they're interchangeable. And the last point I want to make is that the plug-in kinds are so much easier to use than the kinds that screw on. The screw-on nibs tend to loosen over time as you burn, whereas the plug-in kind never get loose unless something's broken. If this snippet from my Q&A was helpful, you'd probably find my courses helpful too. Head on over to burnsavvyacademy.com. But before you do, like and subscribe to this channel so you never miss another video from me. I'll see you on the inside. Later, Pyro.